Hey folks, welcome to episode 3 of the Knifeprint Masterclass Series. I'm your host Dennis Tyrell of Tyrell Knifeworks. In today's episode, we're going to go into the rest of the tools on the left toolbar as we make a camp knife. Let's get right into it.
We're going to start from scratch, and I'm just going to do the basis of my camp knife, which is really just kind of a drop point camp knife. Okay, with a bit of a recurve. Okay, now let's fix it up. We'll go to our node selector. You've seen me do this. I'm changing most of these to symmetric handles. Okay, I'm going to add a little node here. And we're almost there. Okay, so let's say that's the knife we're going to go with. The first thing we're going to add is, we talked about serrations before, but really only to do the sharpening notch. So let's just add that notch back in here just to remind folks. I'm going to use 3/16, and I can go here and just notch a little hole in the side of the blade. But what if I want to do jimping? And jimping is that grippy part, where your thumb goes, and I want to put that on the top of the knife. Well, I can do that simply. I'm going to use a 1/16 of an inch, and I'm going to make them a 1/16 of an inch apart. And now when I click, I'm going to hold and drag down the blade, and when I let go, there's my jimping. So very cool. And you'll notice there's an option here for subtract, which means I'm taking little bites out of the profile here. You can also combine. So if you want to, for some reason, add some little relief here. I'm not going to add it to this knife, but I'm sure there's some uses for that kind of thing. So next, we're going to do a, actually I'm going to fix this a little bit because this is bugging me. I think we need a little bit of a smoother curve here. There, that looks better. So now let's add our bevel. And we'll do the same thing. And I usually like to try to make these match up, of course, with the main bevel. There. I mean, that's not perfect, but that's close enough for today. All right. Oh, I didn't, let's fix that one too. Okay. So next thing that I don't think I've discussed in other episodes is really the ability to select multiple nodes. So I think this handle is probably a little bit long, so let's shorten it. And I can do that by doing this rectangular select. Now that all of these nodes are selected, I can just pick one and resize and move them all. That's very cool. I find this particularly useful when I want different variants of a knife, of different lengths. Like I've got a 4-inch version, a 6-inch version. I would do save as new, and then I basically just pick up a bunch of the nodes and just resize them. And I'm done, because the handle is the same. All right, so we know that. Let's connect these here. So now let's get into some new features on the handle, or on the part of the handle. We're going to use the skeletonize feature. Before we do that, we better define where our handle starts. So let's just do that. Again, we'll clean this up a little bit. And we got to just make sure that this node touches and it's connected to the side here. Now let's add some pinholes. Okay, so I'm going to do this. I was reminded by the Knifeprint folks, because somebody asked me a question in a previous episode, what about the right-click menu? And I didn't even realize that there is this really cool diameter quick pick here for you to pick a bunch of the popular diameters, which is really, really useful. Had I known this before, I definitely would have used it. So they're surprising me with all kinds of features. Let's say I'm going to make them 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this and center it. Okay, so now I've got my 1/8 inch pinholes, and I'm going to put these around the edge here, just for a different look. Oops. Get rid of the path properties. All right. That needs to be just a little, oops. There. So now I can skeletonize this handle by selecting the skeletonize feature. The first thing it asks me is, okay, how far from the edge do you want the skeleton to be? I'll pick about here. And as soon as I do, it puts a little helper here, okay, this dotted line. So now I can just start by just clicking around that edge in a few different places, and it's going to smooth it out for me. Connected. There we go. So now I've basically cut out a hole in my handle, and now I've got my pin, so it's almost like a frame handle. So that's really cool. Let's say that, well, maybe I don't want it like that. I don't want pins on the outside. I'm going to use now the eraser tool. So instead of going and deleting all of those nodes individually, now I'm just going to delete the one that's selected. Same with all these pins. Whoops, that's not the one I wanted. There. Now let's add a couple of 3/16 pins. Oops. Okay. Now, if I just skeletonize this, like this, you'll notice it cuts out the area where my pins are. Well, that's no good. So I'm going to hit escape. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is go back to the draw tool, and I'm just going to basically fake out a little part of the handle here. Whoops, I'll delete that in a second. When you draw paths, you got to remember to double click on the last one. So I'll just go back and delete that node. Connect these, make sure you connect them to the outside here. Okay, I'll just round these out so I don't have any sharp corners. Okay, so now I can skeletonize this, and I can make it pretty tight. There we go. So I've preserved where my pinholes are going to go. I've preserved where my pinholes are going to go, but I still have this steel around it. And if I go to WaterJet Instant Quote here, you'll see what it's going to look like. So those other lines that I drew are basically not there. My two holes and the skeletonized version of my handle. So, very cool. So there's a couple tools that we didn't cover today. One being the pivot tool. The pivot tool we're actually going to save till the last part of this series, and that's where we're going to design a folding knife. And the pivot really lets you open and close the folding knife. So we're going to wait and do it there because there's not really much of a point to use a pivot on a knife like this. The last one is the move tool. We have used this, or I've showed this in another episode, where you can just move things around. And sometimes it's just convenient. If you zoom in and something's slightly off the page, you can just move it on. It's also good when there's multiple things around when you get into layers. And we're going to get into layers very soon. And that's where this comes in, where you can move all of the layers at the same time or just move the current layer. So when you want to, if you're working on a hidden tang knife and you're working on the handle portion, which might be a different layer, you can move that around independent of the actual blade layer. So let's recap what we've learned so far. We've got the select tool that lets you select nodes. You can use the area select to multi-select nodes. Then you can move them around, which is very cool. You can also select and resize nodes with the different resize tools. You have different right-click context menu things to do with paths using the select tool. So lots of good things on the select tool, and of course it comes with all the different node types. The drill tool lets you drill different size holes. You can specify those up at the top when you get into the drill. You can use the drill snap to start to align them and make them equidistant from each other and snap to grid. We've got the draw tool, or the Bezier tool, to draw new paths. The skeletonize tool to basically subtract a portion of your knife. For any kind of non-circular holes in a knife, you can actually use this skeletonize tool. The serration tool to either subtract or add circular areas of your knife, either for these kind of notches or jimping or anything like that. And of course, you can also combine them to add little bumps. We've got the pivot tool that we're going to show in an upcoming episode. The eraser tool to let you remove different paths, okay, and delete them all together. The measure tool, we're going to spend a lot more time in the measure tool in the next episode, when we're going to talk about measuring and printing and sizing your work for printing and actually using, okay, and making sure that you've got something that's representative of actual sizes. And the move tool we just talked about. So thanks for joining me, folks. We'll see you on the next one. We're going to get into some much more advanced features as we go and make some really complicated knives. Stay tuned.